starting this episode right in the middle. Well, not really in the middle, but we're going to continue that thread as Izar began the episode singing Pinky in the Brain that you didn't get to hear. All right.
Because it's copyrighted.
It's cotton. Okay, sorry. Before we go deep into the realms of security and trust and everything else that we always talk about, best 80s cartoon. Because I think that's the vintage for Pinky in the Brain, wasn't it? Was it 90s?
No, 90s.
90s? Okay.
90s.
But
Best
80s?
80s/90s cartoon. I can take
Danger
either
Mouse.
He-Man.
one. Okay.
Good choice.
You're going with DM, Danger Mouse. Okay.
I'm
British accent.
I'm going with He-Man.
I don't remember that. What was Hey Man?
He-Man? It's the one that's from
He-Man.
Grayskull. Yeah.
He-Man. We have the power. Yeah.
That might have been 70s. That might have been 70s, 80s.
Nah,
yes.
it was 80s.
No,
It was 80s. Yeah, because I remember watching that on Saturday morning cartoons when that used to be a thing. And
Okay, but
they would
I
always
also
put it
used to
on
watch
super early.
Scooby-Doo. I used to watch Scooby-Doo, and that was the 60s, but I wasn't alive then, so you
True.
could get Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, but He-Man was later. It was
I could never do Scooby-Doo.
Zoinkers.
It was always the same story.
Every time. Every story. There's only 3 stories possible for anything that you create. Okay? There's Boy Meets Girl, there's Love Triangle, and there's the quest, the hero's quest. Think about every story. Your mind's about to just implode or explode. Every movie you've ever seen fits into one of those 3 categories.
Well, yeah. But what's your point?
I don't know. I didn't have a point.
As a kid, do you care?
No, he said Scooby-Doo. He said Scooby-Doo repeats itself over and over again. And that's my point is everything repeats itself.
Sure.
But
There's
one thing is to repeat the pattern. The other one is to repeat the actual story. I mean, how many times can the butler be the bad guy?
Well, butlers are apparently bad people.
Yeah. It's just different ways of tricking people, right?
That's
kids,
right.
Kids learn a lot of good lessons, right?
All right, my answer is going to be
capture.
Ren and Stimpy. I don't know why. I just loved Ren and Stimpy. It was on Nickelodeon. Stimpy, you idiot! I don't know. It's just a
good choice. That's a good choice.
Yeah.
Wait, Ren and Stimpy is the one that came from the Simpsons?
No,
Like it's the one inside the Simpsons?
no, that's the cat. That's the rat or the mouse or something.
I mean,
Ren
the
and
Simpsons,
Stimpy.
the Simpsons would be a good choice.
I mean, they've been around for 37 years or something. I'm almost as long as it's gonna be one of those shows that we can measure our age against. I think I was about 12 when the Simpsons came on TV. Sounds about right.
If we do the 90s, then you could do South Park, because South Park would be
Yeah, I never got into South Park, but Beavis and Butthead was my show. Come on. Yeah, that would be cool. Come on, Izar. What's wrong with you, Izar? And then they tried to remake it, and the remake is just not so good. Because
they tried to
premise.
They tried to remake Scooby-Doo. And the voice actors are they're just not
Beavis
the
and
same.
Butthead, it's still Mike Judge, that's doing both voices, and the premise was great. Them making fun of YouTube and TikTok videos should have been hilarious, and it was just a total fail. I was very disappointed in where it went. But
I'll give you, Scooby-Doo was a great thing to prepare us for a life of InfoSec.
Oh, interesting.
Because the culprit is always the same thing.
Izar always making that transition to the actual reason that this show exists, to talk about security and privacy.
Somebody has to keep the adult around here.
All right, I was gonna say the other thing is I really have strived to emulate Captain Caveman.
Captain.
Hey, go.
Oh man, all of the flashbacks here of all of these different shows.
It's better than looking like Cousin It.
True.
Mm-hmm.
From the Addams
Which was
Family?
close, but didn't have the superpowers.
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
Yep.
Wasn't Cousin It from where?
From the Addams?
Addams Family.
Oh, it is Addams Family. Okay, I thought this.
Yeah.
Then you made me think it was a Captain Caveman person, somebody that was on the show with it. Okay, yeah. I remember that now. All right, Enough witty banter. It's time to start talking about security. So the topic that we have for today is this general problem that now has been introduced in the software supply chain world, where we have, what do we call them? Actors? Let's just call them actors for now. Introducing themselves into individual open source projects and over a period of time building trust amongst the teams to get to the point where they take on leadership roles or maybe even just the ability to commit and approve code. And then they become bad actors and they start injecting code into an open source project with the intention of having it go downstream into other projects. And so XZ was the item of the hour or day or month, I guess. Like that's been the hot ticket item. But Matt, you had another article that OpenSSF came out and was pointing at this is likely going to be a bigger problem than just a single package.
OpenJS. Sorry. Well, OpenSSF was part of it, but OpenJS, I think was the original originator of this, posing the question about, well, is XC the only one that we caught? Right. And that maybe what's the potential for others to exist? Right. And so, because, I mean, and first off, this is not strictly an open source problem, right? This can happen. We believe it probably has happened, over the many decades of software developers, not just software, system development, that, commercial companies could have been infiltrated by bad actors to gain trusted positions and inject, malicious things into a code base or hardware or whatever. And here now, when it comes to open source, there's already a lack of trust with open source components, right? Because it's somebody in their basement or some kid in high school or not even potentially not even in high school or not even a kid anymore with AI, building something that suddenly becomes that critical component that everyone relies on. And so what do? Right? And that's, I think, where, how do you establish trust? The question really comes down to, how do you establish trust in the people or the processes when it comes to component development, so that you can say, I'm using something that's good, it works, and it doesn't have a side effect.
So that's one thing. But then there's another. The amount of investment that goes into building that cover story, that cover identity, that you're using to try to infiltrate some team, group, organization, or whatever, in order to get whatever payoff you get from this. So in this case, XZ, private key, you forge your keys, you can, if I understood correctly, you can go anywhere that's running that version of that has been infected with that version of XZ. But at the same time, there will always be that one guy that gets half a second delay on their SSH connection and decide that they're going to figure it out no matter what. We are a bunch that does this kind of things, right? And we had enough precedent so that people are sort of like, yeah, if it looks strange, then perhaps it is strange, so let's look into it. So my question here is it really worth it to put all that investment, all those years of investment, money, time, people, into building a backdoor that is basically exposed to the whole world and could be as flimsy as somebody thinking, hey, I got a half a second delay in here?
I mean, 100% it's worth it, right? Like there's a whole underground community of people that buy exploits and buy access into specific devices. And some of these exploits have gone for millions of dollars. And so the better we get at security over time, the less and less of those types of opportunities are going to be available for exploits that are that widespread. But if I can build one myself, especially if I'm a nation state actor, if I can create one, if I can plant somebody in an open source project, I don't even have to send them to the country of origin. I can just put them somewhere else. Because like the one point I wanted to bring back around here is like, this is not a new problem. It's just the first time it's happened in open source. People have gotten jobs inside of companies for the sole purpose of exfiltrating data through their normal access that they have to enterprise systems.
But look at the paradox here. Mm-hmm. You're putting this amazing investment in there for something that once you use it, it's probably going to be a once and done. Because few things go unnoticed. I don't know, few, but most things go unnoticed today just because of the large volume of things that we are looking at, right? And you go into Reddit. There is one subreddit of one of the many cell phone providers, and there's constantly somebody that works at the provider coming in and saying, "Oh, today somebody told me that if I help them on a SIM swapping scheme, they're going to give me $5,000 per SIM." So millions of dollars, years of building a cover identity and everything, versus going and paying somebody who's probably not being well paid a couple of Ks to do what you need.
So I would let's be careful about. We don't know. I mean, gaining access to an open source project and gaining the trust of the maintainer, right? In this case, of the libzma or libzma. No, that's not right. But the XZ, whatever the utility was. Sorry, LZMA. Sorry, that's what
LZMA. Yeah.
LZMA. That maintainer, there was one maintainer who owned the thing, and then somebody infiltrated that by gaining their trust. That probably doesn't require much funds, right? As Chris said, they don't need to be geographically located in anywhere. They just need to have the ability to talk intelligently and actually it may not, we don't know, it may not actually be their code, right, that they're contributing. They just have to be a face, right, or an identity,
and
right?
that's a big investment.
Not necessarily.
Well, because we're not running background checks on anybody.
Yeah, remember
that individual exists as a GitHub user, and that GitHub user just needs an email address.
We're talking about nation state actors here,
but it doesn't matter.
But
it doesn't matter.
Izar's kind of coming at this saying, "Oh, it's too expensive. It's not worth the resources put out." But when you're a nation state and you have buildings filled with people that are just trying to break into other nation states' critical infrastructure, computing infrastructure, whatever it is, this is a blip on their radar, on their budget of having.
But it doesn't require.
But
it doesn't require nation state. I don't think it doesn't require.
It doesn't. But I'm saying that but nation states are certainly one of the ones I'm most afraid of doing this because they have resources to be able to do this. They could have 1,000. There could be 1,000 field operatives right now in a building somewhere in the world who are trying to infiltrate open source projects using this same playbook, and it could be a playbook.
Multiple projects. They could just flood it.
At that point, you're going to start seeing a pattern developing. And I think that's looking at the XZ exploit, we see that it was really elegant, the way that it got injected in there.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to have to keep coming up with more and more and more elegant and covert ways of injecting yourself into this code.
So nation state needs to do.
No, but that's the thing.
The resources.
Just being nation state doesn't turn you into an Uber hacking. Uber as in super, not Uber as in.
Hold on. Stop the presses. Nations of, and I say I'm not even calling any particular nations out. I'm going to say nations of the world have covert organizations that are solely involved in breaking stuff.
Yes.
Including
some of them are more successful and some of them are less successful. Just like thousands and thousands of people that do pen testing every day.
I know a handful of them that came out of the United States version of this,
and
they're some of the scariest people that
totally.
I know on the planet.
Completely.
So what I'm saying is, this is something this is a threat we should be very concerned about, because they do have the ability to create things that nobody's ever seen before over and over again, because they're not just using AI agents to try to create exploits. They're using some of the best minds on the planet to be able to do that. And so to say that they don't have the ability to do this, I disagree 100%.
So let me ask you this. Why is it that in the past 14 years that we know of, there have been no other instances of something at the level of Stuxnet.
Coming back around to Stuxnet. So
that was the tampering of the Siemens PLC code, right?
The Iranian nuclear program, basically.
Right.
So, one, we may not know. I'm not willing to say there hasn't been. I'm willing to say
not at all. That we know.
99.999% sure that other things have happened that are classified and we will never know about. With the same amount of somebody made a decision to talk about that one, to bring it into the public's eye,
right?
Because a lot of this stuff happens behind the scenes and is never, it's never, unless they get caught, it's never brought into the public's eye. Which I would say Stuxnet, there was the parties involved were caught that something happened, like when they figured it out, and then they broadcast that to the world. Same thing with this XZ. So I think there's a lot of other stuff like this that's happened in the world that we just don't have visibility into.
Agreed. And in theory, that's what, folks like Snowden, for instance, right, was for right or wrong, and mostly wrong, he, that attempting to reveal behaviors, right? So we don't know.
But you say right and wrong, mostly wrong. I would say somewhere in the middle, right? Because the U.S. government was doing some things that Snowden pointed out that were not even legal.
And
against United States citizens.
Same thing, and so
but so that's why I say I'm not gonna land on the side of Snowden is wrong. I've always concluded about him that yes, he is wrong in that he broke the conditions of his security clearances and everything else and his employment with the United States government. But there was also the United States government was breaking the law at the same time. And so I'm somewhere in the middle of that whole
the
discussion.
Point here is that somebody injected themselves into one of the most secretive mechanisms of this nation and was able to exfil. We don't know. I don't know if he went in with the head of doing that or if it's something that happened while he was there. Yeah. But it happened with background checks and all that.
Yeah.
And then coming back to the open source stuff, we are just a bunch of Joes. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. So what is it that open source maintainers can do on their side to prevent something?
Or what consumers can do, right? Let's break down the XE.
The first line of defense here is the maintainer, because he's the one giving the access, giving the rights.
He or she, is the one
or they,
because it might be multiples, right? So,
so
right.
But so what can they do? Well, against a well-funded adversary, they're probably going to lose eventually, which I hate to say, but that's just the reality of I'm a realist, right? That's people haven't listened to this show and thought that I'm not a realist. I'm always a realist.
Wait. They're going to lose on the infiltration point of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
But once that infiltration happened, unless they give up all rights as maintainers, they still have the responsibility of checking that code that comes in, and seeing if it's quality code.
So I think you have to get to the point as an open source project, and I'm completely spitballing this off the top of my head. This is not something that I've planned, but I think you have to reach the point.
What else is new?
Yeah, this is just normal. Yes, the hat contains the thoughts, and then I just let them out. So I think you have to build your projects in such a way that you have to basically, and I'm going to go to the end and then kind of reverse engineer my way back. You have to have a collection of multiple individuals that are all colluding together to make this thing happen, like what happened with XZ. And in the XZ case, there was one nefarious party who was driving it under the trust of the other people. As far as what I've seen, there was no collusion amongst the team. So basically, the only way we can have some semblance of protection and trust in open source is to have a bigger group of people that would have to collude together But then it gets into then how do we push up individual packages? OpenSSF has their scorecards and stuff. How do you push this then so that there's a check and balance between, okay, the whole team would have to go off the rails and agree we're taking this thing down and we're causing a big problem. But then there also has to be a check and balance of like what OpenSSF does with the scorecard at a small scale right now, so that there's somebody else has to be looking for something that could clue us into this.
It's more, I think it's a little bit more involved than that. So first off, think about identities, right? If you have a collection of people who are associated with an open source project, how do you know they're the same person or not? How do you know if they are the same person or not?
Blockchain.
Right? So when it comes to
blockchain.
What was that?
Blockchain.
Blockchain.
That was a joke. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to derail you. That was a joke.
Yeah. So unless you tie identities to an individual through biometrics or some other means, that you could get instant collusion by one person claiming to be multiple people. Right.
Or, so but that's more of a classic style of attack of compromising. Like I could compromise the accounts of an open source maintainer and then try to use their access that, there's no collusion. I'm just compromising. So that's been a bigger problem for a long time.
If I have a dozen email addresses and choose some names, why can't I create multiple GitHub accounts and then become multiple people online?
I mean, if you were going to build, you'd have to build the project from scratch though.
No, not a project. Just go to Linus, go to kernel.org and say, hey, I'm here to help. Hey, I'm here to help. Hey, I'm here to help. Now I have three contributors.
True.
It's the same person.
But you mean over the period of time, you would have to run this playbook for a period of time to try to build the trust. And maybe that means open source maintainers need to have a better set of criteria for before you give somebody this level of access, like you've met them in person. If I haven't met you in person, sorry, you can't be part of this. And we're having a discussion. So at least if an attacker is going to try to do this, they're going to have to put somebody that's got the CS chops and development chops to actually sit at the table and be a part of the discussion and not appear like they've got a little thing in their ear they're getting the answers. Hold on one second. Here's how it works.
Do you remember? Does anyone remember the theory behind GPG or PGP?
PGP,
and key signing parties.
The chain of trust.
The chain of trust, where you trusted individuals because you meet them in person and you establish trust.
You were supposed to meet them.
Apart from the MIT signing parties, I never saw it actually being instantiated.
Yeah, people never got together to do it, unfortunately.
But again, guys, it's interesting that you're pulling this so far towards the identity. And Matt, for example, the example of the Linux kernel.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how difficult it is to get code in there? Like really, really, really difficult.
I don't.
Even if you are a maintainer, you don't just show up with a file and say, guys, this is going into the tree, right? There's like layers and layers and layers of check and people reading code character by character, not even line by line. And religious discussions of what goes in, which is proper and great, because imagine if somebody does one of these at the Linux kernel, right? Let's just close shop and go home. Same thing with SSL. And I don't think that the solution lives in figuring out who's sending the code. We will never know if it's not a dog. Love dogs, by the way.
Yeah,
but
by the way, we're not saying this is only this.
No, right. But my point is that that's such a flimsy place to go put controls, because those are going to be so easily circumvented. On the other hand, for the past 60 weeks, we have been banging on this thing that, hey, open source projects, they need the tools to succeed. They need investment. They need people with the right knowledge, right? They need the right tools. They need the application of those right tools. And I don't think that it's an exaggeration to say that we are sort of up to the point where we have to define an open source as SDLC, saying these are the tools that are available for you guys out there. This is how you apply them. This is the ones that you're not going to pay for. These are the ones that you get for free because you're using, I don't know, GitHub or whatever, right? I'm not aware of anybody having written something at that level, something that can be used for that, for any open source project.
But would that help? But that would not have helped in this case, because the individuals responsible for making things happen, who would have been using those tools, can just ignore the results or lie or whatever, right? They can subvert the process.
I'm not sure if I know all the details, but I don't think that this pseudo maintainer became the only maintainer.
He was not, or he or she was not, but still had maintainer access. And so you're suggesting that, again, this goes back to the individuals involved. One of them, at least one of them, with the power to stop a build or stop a release, would need to have to do the right thing.
So proper stewardship of projects should be part of this definition of this best behavior guide or whatever, right? And explain to people that, yeah, you may want to abandon your project, but if you're a foundational thing, then you have a responsibility. So make sure that you pass that to someone with responsibility.
So now you're introducing a new part. So the other piece about this XZ issue wasn't that it was XZ, not that XZ itself, not just the fact that XZ itself was compromised, but the fact that XZ was a component of a component of a component.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So XZ
transitive
was compromised. SSH was the target.
Yep.
Right. And so, and through some intermediary, system D, that allowed this chain of events to come together to allow this backdoor to exist.
It's always system D, isn't it? System D.
But this introduces a new problem. So now we're not talking just a maintainer of XZ that needed to discover that there was injection, right? That there was tampering of the code base, but that the side effect or the net effect was in this other component. That other component, should they have known that this thing could have been brought in by system D, and therefore I need to make sure that all of my transitive dependencies are good, are safe. And in the case of pluggable architecture like this, my understanding is these are modules that can be loaded by system D sort of at runtime. I think I'm not really up to speed on all the details, but I believe that this is something that gets plugged in, sort of, loaded. I'm thinking like PAM or something, something that gets loaded at runtime. So would they even know that XZ was a component in the path?
Yeah, I mean, there's always been a danger with transitive dependencies, because you add something and you don't really know. That's one of the hidden dangers. And that's one of the things that we saw in the Sonatype State of the Supply Chains report from last year, was that 7 out of 8 dependencies were transitive in applications. And so it's a big problem just from the general vulnerability issues that exist in the open source ecosystems. But when you have somebody trying to nefariously introduce a problem, you could, if they pick the right library, it could ripple through the entire applications. Everybody, you could find something that, and that's an interesting analysis that I don't know if anybody's ever done, but I'd love to see, like, what are the packages that are the most used in other packages. So, like, where could you go where you could pick something that would be foundational, that would flow through almost everything? Like OpenSSL.
I saw that for Node.
Oh, for Node specifically?
For other stuff, yeah.
But I mean, think about the OpenSSL and just going back to the OpenSSL vulnerability from Heartbleed. It has nothing to do with any of this supply chain stuff. But what we learned was how reliant we were on OpenSSL as an industry, because it was in every security product. Anybody that was doing any type of TLS or protocol-based cryptography was using OpenSSL to do it.
libc, or a compiler, or a JAT interpreter. Any of those foundational things, get something in there, you're owning the whole world.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. libc would be your, and imagine I don't know how many lines of code are in libc. I imagine it's millions.
Yeah.
I'm getting depressed by the minute here.
Yeah, I mean, what do we do about it though? Like, what are like coming back to your original question that I tried to answer about what should an open source maintainer do about this? Like, what can they do about it?
Well, I think it isn't just, well, and to add to this, we need to be careful. We collectively, the industry, need to be careful about putting all of this burden solely on the maintainers. As we saw with XZ specifically, the burnout of the primary maintainer led to an erosion of the trust to verify or assurance case, and allowed somebody with. There were warning signs, I think, just based on the information that, in the sort of the analysis that was done. There were some interesting things were done, and a on the ball maintainer who wasn't like ready to give up the ship anyway, may have noticed, or may not have noticed, but may have noticed, right? And so this needs to be a group effort. And on top of that, as an open source system, this is the nature of open source. In theory, it should be inspectable by everybody.
Well, that brings us back around to the funding problems. And I'm thinking about this because I just did an AppSec podcast episode with Mark Curfey and Simon Bennett talking about how Zap has now, Mark's company, Crash Override, is now paying for Simon and the other guy. I'm sorry, I don't remember the other gentleman's name, who's part of the core team for Zap, because the OpenSSF thing just didn't work out. However, that was going. So you can tune in for all the details. But they really got me thinking continuously about this problem of, we're not funding open source. Companies that rely upon open source are not funding open source. So, Matt, in the example you just gave, you said, "Oh, well, the maintainer was like at the end of their rope, and they just couldn't do it anymore." Well, part of that is that they never had any funding to do what they're doing. Yet people relied upon this component to do other things that they made money for. And so if you have a world where there's a better funding model, maybe that maintainer doesn't get burned out because they've been doing this for free 40 hours a week in their free time.
That's an interesting one, but it's not only an open problem, it's an open sore for some people, because there have been so many ideas on how to do that funding and nothing picked up. But let me offer a different view, and I could be talking out of my behind here, probably am, but
what else is new?
What else is new? But the thing is, we're focusing still on the making pipeline. And my gut feeling is that nowadays, especially in this golden age of AI this, AI that, and AI the other one, we are finally at a point where it's much easier to do behavior analysis on a system than it was a couple of years ago. So rather than trying to prevent something that offers so many bumps on the road to actually get prevented, and some, frankly, very hard to resolve problems, right? I was going somewhere with this. Yeah. Why don't we focus on actually making sure that the behavior of the systems is expected, and that you're not getting, I don't know, SSH connections from some places where you weren't getting from the past week.
Well, so let's
call that a problem.
Let's talk about that for a moment. So first off, are you talking about
half a second on your SSH connection? Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess are you talking about the runtime behavior, or are you talking about the project behavior?
I'm talking about the deployed system. The thing is out there.
Yep.
And
so you know about fuzzing, right?
Yeah, I'd like to. Yeah.
How many iterations of fuzzing is enough to know that you've covered all of the bases?
Well, it depends how fuzzy it is, but no. Oh, then. So it's my dispatch thing saying that I have water in my. Forget about it. Anyway, it's silent. Why is it ringing? Yeah, I don't know. It's electronics. I can deal with this stuff. Anyway, so so my point is it's not a matter of forcing the behavior with fuzzing or something, but it's actually observing this huge, immense gigantic, I don't have enough adjectives, volume of data that we have coming from our systems, looking for that half a second delay on an SSH connection.
But the challenge when you go down that road is the people that are trying to hide the thing that you're looking for. No, they come to learn the criteria that you're using, and they just find ways to not introduce a half a second SSH.
It's an arms race.
Or introduce a new half a second, right? If I were a savvy attacker, maybe I would have introduced a crypto function that would have required entropy and needed to delay for a little bit to get an entropy.
Maybe you introduced it 6 months ago so that when you put the actual attack into place, it all lines up in the behavioral. So, I mean, that's the reactive. Izar, I'm thinking of what you're describing is the reactive side of it.
It's the detective side. The point is that you have to be detecting the right things. You have to detect the right anomaly. So over time, anomalies that repeat themselves and get explained become baseline behavior, right? So you're not going to be looking at them. But if at the end of the day, what you have is to exploit this thing, somebody can get that private key, generate keys, and go into your systems. And all of a sudden you have SSH connections coming in from the moon. That's not really something that usually happens around here, guys. Perhaps we have to look at it a bit more.
I mean, my expectation in the modern enterprise now is if I have SSH connections coming in today from any place that's outside of the norm, my SOC and my incident response team better be running that thing down and crushing it, whatever
Not
it is.
everybody has a SOC.
But also, who's responsible for that? Like, so let's talk through that scenario. So XC gets the backdoor, gets injected to the SSH process. The SSH process is built into a system that is deployed at a company, at a lot of companies. Who's responsible to do that anomaly detection?
SOC.
Most probably.
Of every individual company for their own individual use cases to find anomalies.
Yep.
At what point do they say, wait, this is a problem in SSH?
I mean, I think that's what we see happen through the ISAC processes where people are doing information sharing vertically in industries. Like there are some channels for communication, which you probably know better than I do because you're closer to those channels and things, right? And I know they're not going to be perfect, but I think they'll give us something, right? It will bubble up to the top at some point across multiple companies.
But will it be timely, right? And will it be a appropriate attribution? I guess yes. Multiple companies may say, "Hey, I'm seeing random inappropriate traffic on SSH," and some of those are persistent connections. Okay, great. That sounds like an attack in progress. Does that scream vulnerability in a component?
Well, that's where your incident response team is going to have to jump in and dig into it, right? Like, and this is kind of Izar's. He's calling it the detection
work
phase.
Yeah. It is detective work, but
I'm calling it a reactive measure. It's more reactive though because we're looking after the fact, right? It's not proactive where we're on the front side and in the open source project looking for it. And
it's
maybe we need both.
Analysis. It's root cause analysis, right? Effectively, it's looking at behavior, recognizing that behavior as inappropriate or incorrect, and then figuring out why is it incorrect. But the problem is, I think in this scenario, those connections would be chalked up as somebody scanning your network or somebody is credential stuffing, not somebody introduced a backdoor in a component that that is used by this thing to gain access.
So I think the where I'm landing here as far as a potential solution is there is a proactive angle to this where open source maintainers need to get better at and have better criteria for how they allow people to access the code. Izar mentioned the Linux kernel is a good example of a model. Now, not every project has the depth of resources that the Linux kernel does, but there's a model and there's probably a simpler thing. There's some lessons you could extract from their approach that could apply to everybody. And then on more of the other side of the coin, having this information sharing style approach where things that we didn't catch in the proactive phase of when somebody slips one of these things through, you do still have to have a reactive nature or detective nature to find a new vulnerability that's been introduced, no matter where, at that point, no matter where the source came from, right? Like they'll trace it back eventually.
And in the middle, there's the step where nowadays we have some great companies out there who make their products available for free for open source projects.
Mm-hmm.
But not every open source project knows that this exists or thinks that they need to make use of it. So there's that bit of hygiene in the middle that we have to somehow enforce to open source maintainers.
Mm-hmm.
And tell them, hey, listen, if people depend on you, then that's a responsibility. You have to have some hygiene in place.
Yeah, but there's no governance that makes them
yeah.
do anything with it. That's
and also, right. I think there's a danger there. You're putting a lot of pressure on those maintainers, not necessarily inappropriately, but if I'm a struggling maintainer, like I'm doing this because I really enjoy doing it, not because anything else. And somebody says, "Well, you're the linchpin to the internet." Okay, I got someone else to do. Bye.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, how many people do you push out of open source development as a result of that?
Yeah.
True. Very true.
Which we can't. I mean, yeah. So, we can't. We don't even have time today to get into a governance argument about open source. Like, there is no governing body. There is some loose.
There are attempts.
There are attempts in some organizations, but there isn't really anybody who's governing open source right now. But that's going to be an issue for another day. So, I don't know if we made any progress on this issue or not. I feel like we at least threw all the pieces out of the table for people to wrestle with and understand. And who knows, maybe somebody will come up with something better than we did as a possible solution. If you do, let us know so we can take credit for it. Just kidding. We'll
actually, sorry, before you end, I think there is one thing we haven't talked about, and we have talked about it, but we haven't talked about how to make it work. So Izar mentioned the Linux kernel as an example. They do effectively character by character code reviews. If every commit and every bit, binary or text, binary ASCII content of a project gets reviewed, where there's a decision tree, right, or decision log, why does this exist? Where did this come from? All of those things can be analyzed. Where does it go? Right? What is it used for? If all of those things can be looked at, then you're probably 70% of the way there. Now, can a human do that? Maybe not. Can a human alone do that? Probably not. Can multiple humans, as a crowdsourced effort, or an AI assisted effort, do that? Maybe that's what we need to look at.
Yeah. No, it could be an interesting intersection when we think about all the things we've talked about in the past months about AI and how it's going to come into play. Maybe this is an angle that AI can have some real impact with. So, folks, thanks for listening once again to the Security Table. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did enjoy it, tell a friend. If you didn't, don't tell anybody.
And now I don't want to run anything anymore.